This is Metabolic Mastery, a KORR Medical Technologies podcast dedicated to advancing knowledge and practice in metabolic testing. Welcome to Metabolic Mastery, brought to you by KORR Medical Technologies. I'm Dr. Mark Humbert. This is my co-host, Dr. Cameron Garber. And once again, we've got Daniel Crumback on. So he is a clinical exercise physiologist. This is going to be a mouthful. It's good, though.
It's an extensive list. Well qualified.
Well qualified. So clinical exercise physiologist, physiotherapist, owner of Strategic Health and Performance. He's a chartered activity and health practitioner, certified strength and conditioning coach, and high performance coach. And today, this is going to be kind of a follow-up from one of our previous conversations where we talked about identifying limitations. And now this is going to be talking about addressing respiratory limitations. And so Daniel has been treating respiratory limitations for over 20 years. So to start out, tell us kind of what first cued you into looking at respiratory limitations in the first place. What led you to start saying hey, we should look more into this and kind of developing a plan for treating those types of limitations?
Yeah, it was doing enough tests to be able to identify there were some patterns that I was noticing. And, when you do enough tests, you realize that you get ranges in your head of what is the bottom end, the top end. Then you start realizing where your best and most fit people sit. And what I did was over time be able to see that you could actually see where the limitations were as far as their breathing was concerned. But then there was no norms. There was nothing to compare it to. It was just my data was going, there's something going on here. This person has every capability of being not in fifth place all the time, but on the podium. Why aren't they? And yet they've done every bit of training. They were pro athletes. They had the best trainers in the world. They had all the time in the world. They were training twice a day. What was it that was keeping them from being on the podium itself? So, and this is long before anybody came out, like Oxygen Advantage and a bunch of other people that came out. So I've been watching the whole process coming along over the last 20 years and getting frustrated with the malapplication of, in all honesty, of resting concepts in respiratory system versus active. And there's way too much over application of theory, which is good if you're sitting in a yoga class or you're having anxiety and you're trying to get control over your anxiety. That's different than when you're on a treadmill or you're out on the road running or cycling, because of the fact that your physiological systems will control your breathing. So it was a big deep dive on going, well, first of all, what is the physiology of the respiratory system? And that in itself is just an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well, so let's dive into some of the things about the physiology of the respiratory system. What kind of are the things that you focus on?
Well, the first thing I did was I looked at what controls the respiratory system during exercise. And also with that came what is the role at different intensities of exercise. And it went away from what a lot of physiologists stated at the time, which was that the respiratory system cannot limit performance. It was written in every textbook. McCarl catch and catch. No, the respiratory system can't limit performance. And you're just going, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. By simply just asking your client, what do you think limits you the most? And them going, my breathing. And you're going, yeah, I'm seeing this represented on your test results. So when I looked at the physiology at lower intensities, zone 2, zone 3, really the respiratory system exists for the delivery of O2 in conjunction with the cardiovascular system at a pulmonary level. So that whole ability to be able to take in air, transfer it across the alveoli, onto the hemoglobin delivers it to the cell at the muscle. Um, Anything in that process can affect the delivery of O2 and utilization of O2. But
Mm.
when we look at the lung separately, it essentially has only two aspects, and that's breathing frequency and tidal volume. And the control comes really from chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors that are ensuring that the vital organs and the brain is safe. And
Yeah.
so, in a lot of cases, what it does is it monitors the pH. And if your pH starts to drop, usually secondary to an accumulation of the metabolites that are created during different intensities of exercise. So it depends on what fuel that you're using, creates different things, whether it's inorganic phosphate associated with zone 5 work, or whether it has to do with just dealing with elevated levels of CO2 at the cell itself. So those chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors send signals to the brain. The brain then tells the lungs what to do. In a lot of cases, it really controls respiratory frequency well to be able to maintain homeostasis and safety within the body itself.
Which is, well, I think it's an
Right.
important point to bring up because, like, the brain is really good at keeping our body safe, right? And keeping us below the level where things stop working. And so, I think understanding that the body is just doing its job, and when we are increasing respiratory frequency during exercise, right? It's like, hey, let's keep pH stable, let's keep things going, and so being able to offload that is a really good thing.
Right, right. Because as you know, the primary driver, I guess, of increased respiration is the buildup of CO2 that's causing that acidity in the blood. And so it's amazing how that works. You mentioned that like the primary purpose of respiration is to deliver oxygen. I would add also, and the removal then of CO2 kind of in that same exchange at the alveoli.
Exactly. What I was commenting on was that lower intensity,
Yeah,
but people don't understand that really when you're in zone 4 and 5, yes, it's
yeah,
delivering O2, but really it's getting rid of CO2 to be able to maintain
right.
homeostasis.
Right.
And
That's the
so,
primary driver of that. Yeah. At the high intensity.
and frankly, um, people would, with this whole aerobic anaerobic, the concept that you're not using oxygen significantly at higher intensities. The fact is that O2 is being used for something different. And you know what? I still can't find stuff out there easily that describes the role of O2 in when you're using zone 4 fuels.
Hmm.
So essentially,
Yeah.
it is a buffer. O2 is being used because the systems using O2 to create ATP are already maximized. But really, in zone 4 and 5, the O2 is being used to buffer the acidity at the cell as well.
Yeah.
And frankly, nobody talks about this, and it drives me nuts. So those people that are trying to, for example, control their breathing, breathe slower,
Hmm.
breathe deeper, interfering with the natural processes that the body uses by measuring chemical changes at the cell and within the body itself. They're actually making themselves worse by listening to these people talking about nasal breathing and talking about the importance of kind of slowing down your breathing. It depends on what fuel system that you can get away with doing this. Really, it's only zone 1 and zone 2 because you start elevating your CO2 levels in zone 3 significantly. And therefore, the prioritizations kind of, if you look at it as being a dividing line, it's where it goes, whether its priority is O2 delivery or is it CO2 expulsion in order to control the acidity within the body itself.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate I appreciate you bringing this up because I've actually talked to several people. They're like, okay, well, during that when I'm doing the testing, should I just have them focus on nasal breathing? And like our body is really good at doing its thing, right? Like we've
Right.
had thousands and thousands of years to adapt to like responding to environmental stimuli, to respond to changes in intensity. And so artificially kind of messing with that, I'm sure as you've seen, right? You know, people that are, I actually had someone, oh, who was I talking to a month or two ago? And they were just saying that like someone had just done something weird to control their breathing in the middle of the test, and then they were just showing me the graphs, and it just looked crazy.
Right. Well, and that's the problem. That's my cue to people is just naturally, breathe normally. Try not to think about your breathing and just breathe.
Yeah.
Just
So,
let it happen.
so
Let
what would be
especially during a test, like let us see
Right.
what is natural for
Yeah,
you,
what
because
normal is. Yeah.
I can spot a somebody who's been reading or watching people on the web, and it's sort of like, oh, for God's sake, stop it. Let that good old central brain be able to monitor the chemical process. I mean, it could do a much better job than you can. And this is where the
Yeah.
cerebral cortex gets in the way. Your body system's ability to respond to exercise is extremely well refined. It will get more well refined the more if you're doing work at an intensity that you haven't done before.
Mhm.
Essentially, it'll get better at it. But a lot of people don't realize that the ramifications and of changing their breathing will affect everything, including O2 and CO2. Everybody will tag on to heart rate drops, and you're going, yeah, but do you want it to drop? Like, is this what you want? Or is there assumption that your stroke volume is going to respond in conjunction with that? And the answer is we
Mm.
don't know. We're not measuring that. But the fact is, by slowing down your breathing, yes, you may see your heart rate drop, but is that what you want? There's tons of people out right now that drive me crazy because they're talking about doing respiratory training related to CO2 tolerance, building CO2 tolerance. Have you caught this?
I have not.
I've seen a little
Have you
bit
seen that?
about it. Yeah, yeah,
Well, first of all, why would you want to? Like, what the hell is your goal? And are you suggesting, that the cells can tolerate higher levels of CO2, or are you suggesting you're down regulating your chemoreceptors and mechanoreceptors? You
right.
know, it's the only two
Yeah,
ways that would change.
yeah. So chemistry is chemistry. You can't change like that. They can perform the right, chemical reactions in a more acidic environment. You can't train that. And so, yeah, why would you want to? I mean, maybe you're increasing your mental tolerance of the discomfort in that state is maybe what they're training, but again, to what performance benefit versus just doing more work at a higher intensity will train that mental state of being able to tolerate the hard anyway, and
Yeah,
and you get more
there's not one,
performance improvement out of it.
yeah, there's not one study showing that either of those options, as far as CO2 tolerance is concerned. Some people excuse
Right.
their devices as because they're poor at getting rid of CO2 as an advantage. And you're going, here we go again. The manufacturers again are twisting things around and not being honest. But in all honesty, the the manufacturers are promoting respiratory training for every person, that it's beneficial for every person. And again, it's not. It's like zone two is not what everybody needs to do. Unfortunately, there is a large number of them, but through metabolic analysis, we can identify who needs to spend more time in zone two, proper zone two. But without being able to measure to determine if the person has a limitation, why are you training it? If it's not a limitation, why are you bothering to train it? Do they have all this extra time and money to be able to spend on trying to fix something that's not broken?
Yeah. Well, and to that point, like we see that all the time. People come to us and they're like, I've tried everything and I've been doing this and it's just not working. And like that's one of the benefits of being able to use this technology to find those limitations, to say like, oh, well, like it's clear why this isn't working. This is the place where you've been training, right? You've been training to be awesome in zone 3. And so like we really need to add in more high intensity work. We need to add in more zone 2, or maybe you're already awesome, right? Maybe you've got a huge aerobic base and your limitation really is that
high intensity.
high intensity.
Yeah. I find that a
Yeah.
lot of the time when people say I've tried everything or they're doing all of these things like Daniel's talking about, a lot of the time they're majoring in the minors where they're focusing on all the little things they see on Instagram that you can do and not focusing really on what's the biggest mover, the base training that's going to get me the most bang for my buck. And they do all the little side quests instead of the main story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
let's face it, there's a lot of people out there that are doing passive training for the respiratory system, and it doesn't transfer. You know, you can't sit in a yoga class or lie on the ground on a mat and improve your breathing when you're running. Especially running. Running, people don't realize that one of the major rules of the diaphragm, which is probably the biggest contributor as far as volume of air that you could move, um, is if the person has poor core stability, the diaphragm will be pulled from its job to be able to help stabilize the spine. And so you'll see more respiratory limitations in an upright position than you will see in cycling, because the fact that you're in a tripod position, you're seated and you have your hands on the handlebars gives you a lot more trunk stability. So
Mhm.
therefore, you tend to see less breathing limitations. So it's
Makes sense.
it's understanding something as simple as the respiratory system and how it works, and be able to assess to determine if there is a limitation in the first place. Is this something I need to address or not?
absolutely. So I know we talked a little bit about this on previous episodes, but just for review, would you kind of go through what we're kind of expecting to see from a respiratory standpoint through the different zones, just to give people an idea of like where some of those limitations are showing up, and then we can kind of dive into how do we address those limitations.
Cool. So the one thing I'll say right off the bat is I don't use VE. I don't use minute volume. I think it's a horrible thing to do because the fact that if a person hyperventilates with poor volume, they'll still have good VE.
Mm.
So there's bad VE out there. And if you can accept that sentence to be true, which it is, don't use VE. It'll fool you. Oh, look at they're moving 180. And you're going, yeah, 180 liters a minute, but they're breathing at 40 breaths a minute in zone 2. Like,
Mm.
do you understand the ramifications of hyperventilation on the cell's ability to offload and utilize oxygen? Do you understand the effects on the cardiovascular system by hyperventilation? And the fact that you get decreased venous return, so therefore you get decreased blood back to the heart and stroke volume goes down. Heart rate will rise. So everything you do with your respiratory system affects every other system. The first thing I do is I use a simple case of looking at respiratory frequency and tidal volume throughout the test. And KORR CardioCoach Pro allows me to create any graphs internally, which
Mhm.
is sweet. No exporting of CSV files. I can create any graph that I wish. This is the major respiratory graph that I look at. And I teach this as part of my courses themselves. So on the screen is down here is their volumes, VT. This is their breathing frequencies. And I always like to have heart rate on it as well. Now, believe it or not, this is a graded exercise test, and you can tell from this heart rate that there's an actual issue as well. But it
Mhm.
may not be cardiovascular when we actually look at the respiratory response. So sometimes, for example, if people own Moxie, they'll assume that this muscle cell cannot use oxygen. But the fact is, if you don't have ventilatory data, they could be hyperventilating, so therefore causing hypocapnia.
Mm.
Therefore, the O2 can't offload at the cell, and you end up looking like you have a metabolic issue, and you don't.
Mm.
You have a respiratory limitation, which is affecting the other systems. Interesting case. I always like people to just look at the patterns, and the one thing you'll see is just extremely high variability. His
Yeah.
breathing frequencies are all over the map. You see that?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so when you look here, his breathing frequency is 17, and within the next minute, he's 48 breaths. Then he's back down to 22 breaths. Somebody's trying to get a grip on their breathing. It just, I need to drop down. I can't hold it. I need to drop down. I can't hold it. I need to drop down. And then you're seeing a more normal response up here because their inability to be able to respond because the intensity level has gone up.
Mhm.
So this looks like a complete lack of coordination here. There's just no ability to coordinate their breathing. Now, I like to look at their breathing frequency patterns as well as how are they breathing in each zone.
Mhm.
So in zone one tends to be discoordinated because of the fact that it really is not a high enough stress to cause a coordination of the respiratory frequency. But you can see this gentleman's here is 12 breaths and 25 breaths. And here he comes to 31 breaths, but he's down to 17 breaths. This needs to be dealt with this is a respiratory limitation, but it's a different type. And this is what I like to get across. You don't have one type of respiratory limitation. And I'll explain this as we go along. But this could be volume based, or this could be related to their capacity in general. In other words, their lung size itself, or an inability to use that lung size or capability that you'd pick up during a test. Now, his attempt is to go too low. I mean, 12 breaths is ridiculously low. I like my guys between 18 and 22 for zone one, about 20 to 26 in zone two, and then you'll go about 26 to 32 in zone three, and you're looking for about 30 to 40 in zone four, and greater than 40 is zone five. And I like to look because I've already zoned this person to be able to see what kind of frequencies that they're using. So if we do go up to his peak BF, 69 breaths a minute. With cyclists, they should never be over 50. Runners should never be over 55. And for obvious reasons. How much volume can you move if you're breathing more than one breath per second?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
just, number one, you don't have time to be able to get enough air in nor air or CO2 out to be able to
Mhm.
load. But even to be able to transfer across the alveoli onto the hemoglobin, that is just such an active activity. And on top of that, if I ask this person to run for 30 minutes, how much more work is he going to be doing just running this respiratory system?
Yeah.
So when we look at this, he is essentially trying to control hyperventilation here, and he's not controlling hyperventilation here. So even in zone four, he's 60 breaths a minute, and he should be between 30 and 40. Now, that's not an isolation. You must look at the tidal volumes. And what I use is a peak VT. So it's nice and simple. During the test, find out what the maximum amount of volume of air he can move. 1.4 liters. Is that good? My favorite question. Is that good?
Mhm. I've seen higher for sure.
The answer is it depends on his
Right.
gender and his height, right?
And his
And
fitness
even at
level.
times his
Yeah.
ethnicity, right? And his
Yeah.
age. So the answer is you go, great. Do we have the ability to look at norms by gender, age, and height? The answer is yes. So I just write down the PVT of 1.4, and what I want to do is enter this person's information into what I use is the GLI. So what I use for norms for respiratory is the GLI, or the Global Lung Function Initiative. It's the largest calculator for norms for breathing. And this is actually built into a lot of spirometers that are out there. So if you don't have a spirometer, you just simply enter their age. This gentleman's 65. His height is 157.5, not very tall. So you're thinking, oh, maybe that 1.4 is not too bad. He's pretty short. Pick a male. You can also, under spirometry, pick an ethnicity or leave it race neutral. This can cause controversy when you start asking people, but it shouldn't. We should be fine with it. And this gentleman is other or mixed, so you would just click that off. There is a tendency for certain ethnicities to have smaller lung size. So what this does is makes it more specific to their population. And if you have any measured values before, this is it gives you the ability to do a pre or post bronchodilator. In other words, if you wanted to test their spirometry before they took a Ventolin or anything like that, salbutamol, then what you could do is enter theirs, get them to take their medication, enter them there. But in this particular case, we're asking what norms are. So all we want to do is go down to I am not a robot and hit calculate. And what it'll do is for that age and gender and height, it gives you a predicted FEV1 and a predicted FVC and a ratio. Now, the forced vital capacity. So this is a test you do with the spirometer normally. So what they've done is they've taken tons and tons of data from other 65-year-old males of that ethnicity at about that height. And this is what it came out as predicted. It does provide lower linear and upper linear numbers as well, which is very helpful. So most of your top level athletes should not be predicted. They should be above if they're naturally gifted. So sometimes you'll find your guys are sitting in the high end of upper linear. It's something to take advantage of. So in this particular case, the predicted is 2.4 and the FVC is 3.055. So what we have is they scored, they actually scored 1.4 during the test. Now, luckily enough, I could just take these numbers and be able to use them. Now, what I use, the forced vital capacity, that's the maximum size, usable size of the lung. So you take a deep breath in, you breathe out for 6 seconds, as all the air out of your lungs, and it just measures the capacity that you can use. But you're supposed to breathe out as hard as you can at the beginning, and it records what's referred to as this forced expiratory volume 1 second. And that would, in this particular case for this gentleman, it's 2.4 liters. I use that number. It was me that came up with the concept of using the number. Other people were trying to use FVC and it made no sense to me. To me, I need to know the maximum amount of air they can move in 1 second, because if they're going to be breathing 50 breaths a minute, it's the number that I want to be able to see versus their total volume. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So in his particular case, it's 2.4. Now, looking at thousands and thousands of tests, using the FEV1 to their peak VT, in his case 1.4 that he achieved on the test, and calculating percentages of what their FEV1 is that they're capable of using during the test, I came out with a normal range. And it should be 75 to 85% of the predicted FEV1. So if we calculate, in his particular case, he got 1.4. And all we have to do is say 1.4, which is peak VT, divided by 2.4. and times 100, and he comes up with 58%.
Mm.
That's a severely limited peak VT.
Hmm.
If we take the time to go back to his test, there's also interesting patterns within the test itself. So if you look here, he has no areas of elevated tidal volumes. He hits this peak,
Yeah.
1.2, 1.3, and no matter how slow he breathes or how fast he breathes, he can't breathe any more than that. And
Hmm.
what's really interesting, what happens after the test ends? If he had
Just
an issue of being able to use his volume while he's moving, when the test ended, what you should see is elevation of their peak VT, and you don't. So
Hmm.
this guy has a severe capacity issue. In other words, he, he has an inability to use this is the best volume he can use. Now, the issue we have in that particular case is you're left with another question. What's his capacity at rest? So if we did a spirometry test on him,
hmm
because this the inability to use the volume he has, or does he just not have volume?
hmm
So what's nice is you can just go back to get spirometry done, which in his particular case, I've used this for this example. I'm going to use the pre-bronchodilator and it'll throw it in there. So his actual FVC, his FEV1 is 2.2 on spirometry, and his FVC was 3.3. So you can enter in the spirometry and find out how he performed. So if we put it in and we go back up, you're going to start to see, you should see, there we go. So bringing that back in. So here is his measured spirometry 2.2 FEV1, 3.3 FVC. His ratio is 66%. Like in particular, the guy can't breathe out. So if you look at his total
Hmm.
volume versus what he can get out 1 second, he can't breathe out. Again, a different approach. As far as percentage of his predicted, you can see here that he scored only 90% of predicted FEV1, but he scored 108% of his FVC. So his lung size is normal and slightly larger, but his ability to expire forcefully in 1 second
Hmm.
is severely limited.
Hmm.
So again, a different training method. So my issue with a lot of devices is the fact that this is a respiratory limitation and they give everybody the same program. But the fact is, this guy just can't breathe out. And he can't use that volume during the test. So
hmm
his lung volumes are actually pretty normal.
Yeah.
He can't breathe out forcefully, which will definitely affect his ability to be able to use his respiratory system well during a test.
Yeah. What exactly is leading to that, right? Where you have normal or even above normal lung volumes, but then like actively it's just all falls apart like we saw in that test.
Well, if you look at the kind of the actual definition of asthma, it should be, or exercise-induced bronchospasm, is the fact that they lose the ability to expire quickly. It's an airway limitation, not a lung limitation.
Hmm.
So you can imagine my journey along this path over 20 years, and you're just going, okay, what's causing this? Um, has this person been diagnosed in the past? And one of the things I would do, one of the first things I did was I bought a spirometer because I couldn't tell whether their really terrible volume during the test and their hyperventilation was actually due to the fact that they actually have a lung issue that needs to be dealt with separately. So if this person had been prescribed a bronchodilator, then I would do a proper test where I would get them to use their bronchodilator immediately after doing the test without it and wait about 5 minutes and hit it again to see if there's any increase in the volume itself. Because the
Mm,
bronchodilator will mainly affect the airway. So
that's
the fact is there's about 7 different types of respiratory limitations that will affect your performance. The trick is to tease out. And it's not difficult. What I'm suggesting is if you don't have a spirometer, just use this website. Enter in the peak VT or pick up the peak VT and compare it to FEV1. If they're not between 75 and 85%, if they're not between 75 and 85%, then there's a problem.
Hmm.
So I would not necessarily train capacity. This would be a capacity issue. But they have good capacity. They're 108% of normal. I might train expiratory power, right, to improve
hmm
this. But really, the biggest limitation is the fact he can't use the volume he already has. So going back to his results, his peak volume is only 58%,
Mm-hmm.
and it should be between 75 and 85%. So there's a series of questions that go on from here as to, okay, this is what happens when he's moving. He's okay when he's still. Do you have a long history of low back issues? Would be a question. I would check thoracic and rib mobility to determine whether they had really a stiff thorax that would limit diaphragmatic movement itself. Do they have a very stiff diaphragm? Inability to be able to move it efficiently and effectively to be able to move larger volumes. But I would probably train that to be able to get them to move more volume in a training session. So what I would do is I used to be very big on using IDIAG out of Switzerland, had a wonderful device called the Spirotagger Go, and then developed a really beautiful respiratory training device called the P100. But unfortunately, they went under. And it was the
hmm
best device out there. The P100 was amazing because it would measure volumes and it would measure frequencies, and you could plug in training programs. But I now use from Isocapnic. It's called a Breathe Way Better. Actually, these are old buddies of mine from British Columbia that I've known for 20 plus years. That they also use Spirotagger and needed a replacement, and so they developed their own. Now, one of the things that you get from this is if they can't breathe good volume and they're hyperventilating, how beneficial is it to give them zone 4 and zone 5 intervals to do?
Yeah, not
Are
Yeah.
you
not
just
great.
are you are you just being a dick, you know? He can't breathe up there, you know? You need to train this guy down lower where the volumes are not as important because I don't want to drive this hyperventilation in further into it. So one of the good things you not only get from looking for respiratory limitations is a decision of whether you're going to go to what you would normally prescribe as a physiological training session and not give it until you fix the respiratory.
So there's a variety of respiratory training devices out there. Obviously, I know you probably have your opinions on them. You've seen some probably really good, some really not so good. Will you talk to those and say like kind of what are the things to look for and what are the major limitations of some of the devices out there, or perhaps even how are people using good devices in a way that's not beneficial?
Not only I've used them all. I get approached by people all the time and sent devices to use. There's basically only one style of device there's two styles of devices. A majority of them are resistive. In other words, they
Hmm.
allow you to be able to make it more difficult to move the volume. Does it make sense? So
Hmm.
Hmm.
there's a dial on it that you can control resistance. What would happen if you gave this person a resistive device to use?
I think typically those resistance ones are on inhalation, aren't they? Or do they
Yeah,
do both typically?
they- they're they're usually resist. They can be resistive both ways, inhalation and exhalation.
Yeah, it just depends on what his, like you said, what his limitation is. But if he's got a limitation because of like diaphragmatic stiffness and you further strengthen that diaphragm, you could actually enhance that stiffness instead of
Yeah,
improve that capability or
there's the
whatever. Yeah.
joys of being a physio in the world, right? It's the fact that we understand that if we add more difficulty, they're just going to get better at moving that horrible volume, and
Hmm.
only a little bit better, but you're going to hammer home the problem.
Yeah.
So my big issue is with resistive devices is they only really have two applications. If they breathe fairly well during a test, but their ratio of their lung volume to what they can get out in 1 second is limited, you can use a resistive device to improve forced expiratory power. But that's such a small percentage of this population. There's so many volume issues. So, and the other time that you would do it is if they have really good volume and they're training for an event and they want to be able to improve their endurance. Adding a small amount of resistance will make it easier on race day. So, really, 90% of the devices out there, I don't recommend, except for
Mm.
as very, very rarely. Otherwise, what you need is something where they can concentrate on improving their volume and not to make things harder for them to do that. So in a lot of cases, it depends if I do or do not have thoracic stiffness or diaphragmatic stiffness to deal with, because that would be more of a mobility program that I would give them to do, and plus or minus manual therapy, manipulation, etc.
Hmm.
But that's the reason why I use the isocapnic device, and it's super simple. And one of the good things about it is it's not expensive. So
Hmm.
in my case,
That's
what I
always a plus.
use is this device here. So
Hmm.
essentially, all it is a valve and a bag. There's no dials to increase resistance or anything else. All there is a valve that allows O2 to come in and CO2 to go out, or expired air to go out from the bag. And what I can do then is I know the volumes I want them to be able to move, and therefore I can get them starting off their training and give them specific workouts about improving their volume by trying to get them to be able to use more of to fill and empty the bag, but also by using position. So you can start in a seated position where they can really concentrate, for example, on their breathing, and then work up to a standing position if that's applicable to their sport. A split kneel. You can change all your positions around to match they what they need for their sport. One of the issues I have with this device is that if you really pay attention, no air comes out of the valve if the bag's not full or empty. This company is one of the companies that states that this helps build CO2 tolerance. It's only because the valve doesn't work the way that it should. So in this particular case, I go back to Spire Tagger. We always use clips on the bag. We match the volume of the bag to the person, and that way they could fill and empty the bag each time, and therefore get fresh O2 in and CO2 out. Also,
Hmm.
you get the feedback associated with that pressure in the bag, and that is really it stimulates their training itself. So again, this is what I would use for volume issues themselves, which are going to end up being about 90, 95% of your guys. And like I said, what I like about it, it's not expensive for someone to buy for themselves, which is nice.
So you mentioned kind of 7 main respiratory limitations. Will you just talk through those really quickly, just kind of as a review for our listeners? Like, what are the kind of main 7 that you're seeing?
So you have the guys that will have poor FVC and FEV1 related to norm. So that's one grouping. They'll both be affected. And that could be somebody who's had, a classic case would be a hockey player or a cyclist that had a previous clavicular fracture and associated rib fracture, and everything's stiffened up, and all their volumes are low.
Mm-hmm.
It could be COPD as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so there's that limitation for both. And the answer is, in that case, you train the volume first and the power second. You could have normal FVC and poor FEV1, and then you would train the expiratory power. Then you can have normals on both of these, but you could have a normal volume during their test and normal volume during their test, but hyperventilating or hypoventilating.
Mm.
In that particular case, it's a coordination issue. So that's a capability coordination. Or like this guy where his volume was normal on spirometry, but poor here, that's a capability volume limitation. So, and you could go the other way where just because you have low volume doesn't mean you're going to see hyperventilation. That's what everybody thinks. And you're going, no,
Mm-hmm.
you need to look each time. So you have other types of coordination issues as well. Coordinations issues with no volume limitation are really easy because what I use is a metronome. So if
Mm.
I'm setting them out in the zone 2 and they're used to breathing 30 breaths a minute, I get them to set a metronome for about 22, 24 breaths a minute, and they try and learn to bring their breathing frequency down. And what will happen is you get a concurrent increase in the volume because a lot of
Mm.
people can be really lazy and not use their volume until the end of the test. And they just
Mm.
choose to hyperventilate. The problem is, of course, it has profound effects on the other two systems. So we don't want them doing that for a performance side of the house. So that's all. There's so many different limitations. Now, a majority of what I do, I use the Breathe Way Better device, but the programming has to be completely different. Um, so that ability to increase volume is extremely difficult. It's really high intensity work. The good thing is that it doesn't really affect your ability to do your other workouts during the day. One thing that's lovely about respiratory training is unless if you did a really hard respiratory workout, you may not want to do high intensity intervals the next day, but it won't affect your zone 2. So it's really easy to intersperse respiratory training into your programming. But the only people that get respiratory training with me are those with it being kind of a primary limitation. And I've taken people, like I said, 6th place consistently, could never beat this other guy ever, to a 1st place position in about 3 months. And the other guy had no idea what was going on. Like, why the hell have you improved so much? I've been racing against you for 3 years.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's
Like,
because the
what did you
only
take?
limitation I could find on him was respiratory.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, that is fascinating.
So, there's a little aside. Cameron and I were having this conversation a couple weeks ago, and so
Yeah.
I want to hear your take on this. So, one of the things that Cameron said is that in elite athletes, you don't typically see many cases of exercise-induced asthma, right? And so,
Probably misdiagnosed. That's if I could. Sorry to be rude, but there's so much misdiagnosed. You get them; they've never done a pulmonary function test in their lives,
Right.
and they're
But
prescribed salbutamol or Ventolin or one of the dilators. And you ask them. I said, "Have you ever gone in and done a test where you've had a device in your mouth and you breathe?" No, never. I just told them my symptoms and they gave me the drugs.
yeah, that's wild. Yeah, well, and so that was kind of my point with it was Well, it was is this a chicken or egg thing? Like, which came first? Is it that most of your elite athletes never had it, and that's why they're elite, um,
Or is it a fitness?
or is it a fitness thing that they couldn't achieve it or whatever?
Yeah. So basically, like, are people that have exercise-induced asthma self-selecting out of kind of elite performance,
Right.
or is this really just a fitness issue, and people that are elite performers just have really great fitness, and so that doesn't end up being a limitation? Does that make sense? So I'd be interested
I'd
for your take
I'd
on
have
that.
yeah, I'd have such a hard time answering that because there's so many people misdiagnosed. Um,
Hmm.
like the legitimate people with asthma, it's a bugger. Like you can't out train it, right?
Right. Well,
Whereas a lot of people would,
and people will say, "Oh, but I do so much better after I have my inhaler." And it's like, well, anybody would perform better after they took, used an inhaler. Like all of
yeah,
us
yeah,
would.
marginally, right? And that's what's
Yeah.
really even people that I've worked with, um, that believe that their inhaler works. The first thing I do is I do a spirometry pre-med and post medication and show them there's no difference.
Yeah.
And they go, huh, geez, I thought for sure it would make a difference. And I'm going, no, it really doesn't make a difference. If you want to continue inhaling steroid the rest of your life, go ahead. I'll guarantee
Well,
you
no,
there's
so
ramifications.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Well, and that's such an like I had never thought about this before, right? Of like what you said is like people are misdiagnosed, and so you end up onboarding a steroid medication, right? Which, as you mentioned, can have long-term impacts, and they may not even need that, and that's like kind of wild to me.
Yeah, this is why, for me, having spirometry is really helpful. And for those that are interested, in a spirometry device, the the device that I use is because of the fact that I work with a bunch of different people, and I want to be able to store a whole bunch of different people's information. This device I use, the Aspire Bank 2 Advanced, because it is really a high quality one, and the software with it is brilliant on identifying limitations. Um, so not just
Hmm.
the numbers I look at, the three numbers I look at, but I can also look at, for example, their expiratory power in the first 25% of the test, 50%, and we're seeing changes in endurance over the time itself as well. So, if you don't, though, what's great is you just use GLI, get predicted, compare it to peak VT, look at the patterns, and state whether they have a respiratory limitation. If you don't have a spirometer, if you identify large limitations of volume, then you may want to recommend the person to get a PFT or pulmonary function test or spirometry done. Or if this interests you, get a spirometer and make it part of your testing process. And I do this after the person's RMR is complete. I get them to stand up before they're allowed to eat so they don't spit food all through my device. I get them to do their
Smart,
spirometry,
smart.
and then I get them to, go to the bathroom, get some water and whatever they want to eat. And then I have all the data itself. And, you know, a large percentage will be within normal. That they're going to have uh, normal lung volumes and spirometry. They're going to be able to use between 75 and 85% of their actual or predicted FEV1 during the test. Great. Guess what? Respiratory gets green light. I'm not going to concentrate on that at all. Move on to something else. Because something's always limiting your performance. So it's a great addition in my mind, and all the data's there. Um, all you have to do is go into your KORR, and there is a graph that comes with most, which is VT and breathing, tidal volume, and breathing frequency over time. I like adding heart rate into mine because of the fact I want to see the changes in intensity. Because I zone my people, then look at their breathing frequency by zone itself. So the potential ramifications for this person by increasing their volume is the fact that we're going to have much more coordinated breathing. We're not going to have a peak breathing of 72 breaths a minute. I mean, that's like a chipmunk. And there's no way they can be coordinated. It can't be fun doing any high intensity training. It must just feel like you're dying. And without doing, zone 3 and zone 4 work, you're not going to improve their VO2 max. VO2
Hmm.
max is hidden in zone 3 and zone 4, not zone 2, like people say. And they're certainly not going to do zone 5, which has a huge metabolic benefit as well. So if they have those physiological limitations, you can't even use it until you fix this
Hmm.
problem. And I think it's
Yeah.
something that to be a responsible professional, it's not that difficult to be able to look at the data and be able to make this next move. And if people want to know how I train capacity versus capability versus coordination limitations, then they can just reach out to me. And it's probably another 17 hours, but no, it's not. It's probably just explaining the theory, which is very much very strength and conditioning based.
Well, and let's take this case example of the person that you talked about, and we consider like what happens for most people past the age of 65. We know that most people lose significant amounts of strength, of muscle power year over year. We know that the risk for falls goes up precipitously after the age of 65. And so in terms of quality of life, in terms of morbidity risk, in terms of mortality, like if we leave some of these issues unaddressed, then that means like, hey, quality of life may not be great. What we see with a lot of people is that, quality of life drops off, and then there's just this, 10, 15, 20-year period of time of really poor health, poor quality of life. And being able to intervene and address an issue like this, and like, okay, now we can add in some of those things that will push up your performance, right? That will give you a larger reservoir of strength, power, capacity to draw from in the case of illness or injury. And so being able to address this, find that out early and then make changes really can have powerful knock-on effects in terms of quality of life, in terms of, how long you live. Like it's not just a simple like, oh, let's help this person breathe better. It's like, hey, we could really turn around health and make sure the last, 10, 20, 30 years of life are much higher quality.
Absolutely. And there's sometimes there's great stories. A physiotherapist that I worked with up here, I picked up a huge respiratory limitation with her and actually decreased ferritin issue as well. A lot of people don't realize that if you have unhealthy, if you have a respiratory limitation, it can have a corresponding effect on your health of your hemoglobin as well.
Hmm.
So this interaction is quite common. I put her on to respiratory training, appropriate program considering what I found, and she did not respond. She found the training frustrating and felt that she wasn't getting anywhere. And so I kept reviewing the testing or the training itself and sat with her, and she was doing all the training. And I said, it's time for you to see your doctor. And she's just been diagnosed with a severe scarring disease in her airways.
Mm.
So we found it. We knew that it was a volume issue. But when training doesn't change, when you know that it should, we responded professionally and stated the fact, oh, there's something going on here. You should have responded extremely well by now. So she is now on medication and also waiting for surgery.
Hmm.
But 99% of my guys improve significantly if they have the diligence to do the programming, because it's not easy. It's one of the best core workouts you'll ever do is respiratory training. It's absolutely amazing. It will also help with things like some ladies' issues. For example, peeing yourself when you jump up and down. It's tied to the pelvic floor and the diaphragm. Doing respiratory training in a lot of cases improves that as well.
Hmm,
I thought
that's
I would
interesting.
bring up another test. So this is a 155 centimeter, 53-year-old female. And again, if you're looking at the pattern of the breathing, it's so much more coordinated in this particular case.
Yeah.
And zone one was, as you can tell, I
Hmm.
always do a 5 minute warm up prior to doing any of my elevation. And it's always, my heart rate is always between 90 and 100 beats. That way I don't miss the bottom end. Um, but as you can see, the breathing frequency is 25, 27. This is zone one. That's too fast. This is her zone two, and she's up to 34 breaths. And you're going, there's a problem here. But she tops out zone four and five. She's kind of where she should be, the 40 to 50. So this is an issue. Now, I could look and say, is she not using her volume early? But the fact is, her volume down here is 1.1 liter,
Hmm.
and here it's only 1.5 liter. So you're going, okay. Um, there's some hyperventilation going on here that I need to control and bring it down because it's going to have ramifications. But if you look at her, she has an extremely low VO2 peak. And again, what I would do is go against the GLI and plus or minus spirometry and realize that she's about 65% of normal.
Mm.
Um, and therefore she has only one ability to respond, and that's to go up is increase her frequencies to try and increase her VE. One thing that's always really cool that nobody pays attention to is what happens after the test is the fact that she drops significantly. There somebody who has good volume but can't use it during a test, you'll see a spike in their tidal volume afterwards because they stop moving, and all of a sudden it should go up. So her spirometry was actually limited as well, and so therefore what we did we started her off with a capacity volume program itself. So it sounds complicated, but if you want to know more and take my course on this, all you need is VT and BF data, and that's all you need. Essentially, you can start doing much better analysis of respiratory limitations.
This has been, again, it goes back to the idea of having good data helps us make better decisions. And like, that's the nice thing about Cardio Coach is like it's really easy, as you said, to create those graphs. You don't have to export it. You can do it right in the software. And then we can look at some of those things. And so having this different data, if people go back and listen to our episode on limitations, Daniel goes through some more of the different graphs, and it can just be really helpful for identifying what is the lowest hanging fruit, right? What's the primary thing that we want to work on, and then addressing that limitation, and then addressing the next limitation, addressing the next limitation. And that just has, again, can have really powerful impacts on performance. Like you mentioned, going from sixth place to getting on the podium, or in some cases, like, hey, we've tried to address this with training. Like now is the time to refer out, right? We need to bring in some other medical professionals, and so it's just helping us to make the next, give the person the information that will help them make the next right decision for their health.
Yeah, I
That,
think
yeah.
it's the limitation identification. It's people don't. It respiratory is the one that nobody looks at. Um, so it's very exciting and it opens a whole world. Cardiovascular is still not looking at things that they should look at to identify limitations. Metabolic, definitely not. Although all the data is available with our devices,
Hmm.
it's your method of analysis. But one thing that people really are poor at is understanding the effects of one system limitation on another,
Hmm.
and not being confused. Victim, culprit. If you keep chasing the culprit or the victim around, you're not going to get anywhere. You need to determine who started this process in the first place, and I, and I, you I just all I need is my cardio coach data and my methodology, and it's a very clear journey. People are always amazed on, geez, that's so clear what we need to work on. And yeah, let's get on with this. This should take about 8 to 12 weeks, and then we should be able to move on to the next thing. So it's you know, I can't recommend um, more having metabolic analysis data, valid data that and the right data. So having like fat and carbohydrate for zoning, zone one and zone two, and looking at metabolic function, couldn't live without it. But just having the basic respiratory data, and again, avoid VE. It lies.
Absolutely. That's getting that right data and being able to apply that appropriately just makes it so that we're really helping people instead of just kind of a stab in the dark like we've often done with fitness for generations. And so I love that about the cardio coach that allows me to give people real information that allows them to be empowered to exercise according to their body, where their body's at.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, when we have that data, it makes a really clear roadmap. It doesn't have to be so complicated, right? Like when we
Mm-hmm.
can see that highlighted in how they're performing on the test, then it's like, oh, instead of just having to guess what to do next or let's try this, it's like, okay, well, like this really is a major limitation. Let's focus here and see what we can accomplish. And
Yeah.
so like both from the practitioner side as well as from the client side, I think it can just take a lot of the anxiety and stress out of it because both people will end up having a clear roadmap to follow.
You know, and as you know, it's that time of the year where I get frustrated. You know, everybody's paying for their marathon programs, half marathon programs, and so everybody's punching out the calendar programs. You know, there's it's not a specific program for that individual. It's January. It must be base. You know, we're going to establish your base, and you're just going, oh my God, this guy's
Yeah.
base is outstanding. Will you leave him alone? He needs to work on this, this, and this. So you know, if you're paying for a coach, I can't express enough the importance of paying for testing to determine whether your coach is and giving your coach the information and hopefully making adjustments. I mean, not that there isn't a specific training program specific to your race, the date, the distance, the elevation, blah blah blah. That's strategy stuff. Putting in the mileage, you know, building up the capacity, getting the headspace, knowing that you're going to be able to complete this. But there's your physiological program. And at this time of the year, it's a really fabulous time of the year to start taking care of major limitations that you will not have time for when you're doing the training for your racing.
Yeah.
Yeah, love
It,
that.
it's kind of like doing the other corrective exercises or strength training or other things to build yourself up in the off season. Why not correct that as well so that
Yeah.
when you get into season, you're all ship shape.
One thing that's really cool too is respiratory training can be used pre-race, post-race. So nothing freaks other people out more than watching somebody standing on the race line, hauling away at their breathe way better device, getting the respiratory system warmed up for 5, 10 minutes prior to a race. It just freaks the living crap out of them, and it works really well.
Play
Like
mine.
you get your diaphragmatic movement, you get your thoracic movement, your respiratory system, one of the last things to warm up. So I get all my guys to do about a 5 minute workout um, at the frequencies and volumes I want them to use during the race. And post race, if you get them to hyperventilate, they'll blow off their CO2 more quickly and therefore be able to recover more quickly. So you can use the
Hmm.
tools for strategy as well. One of the
I
great
gotta
things
love
about
it.
strategy is if you, I get people, once they get honed in on the respiratory training, I said, pay attention to other riders, other runners. You'll know when to go because you're going to hear them losing their breathing. And it's a perfect opportunity to attack, attack, attack. The other thing I
Yeah.
always recommend to my pro cyclists and runners, if you are doing a high intensity effort, let's say you're climbing, you're doing that last bit of high wattage work to get over the top of the hill because you want to get into the descent, don't slow your breathing down right away. You've just created a massive amount of CO2. Keep your ventilation rate higher for about 30 seconds to blow off the CO2, then go after your volume and slow yourself down. Because the last thing you want to do is elevated levels of CO2 in the brain. Bad decision making slows down your reactivity, crashes. So there's just so many ways that, I started off with just going, this is not good, and it seems to be a problem in comparison to others that do really well. Adding the GLI, because I needed a set of norms. The issue with field testing, as we know, there's no norms. So the GLIs provided me with the norms. Adding spirometry was the next phase. And having the right device to respond to it is essentially, I have not changed my approach significantly, probably in the last 10 years. I've just changed my training around a little bit. It is mainly responding to other people that have found this, other experts who are misinterpreting the information or just trying to make a buck, because it's fairly easy to do that. But try and stay away from those guys. And if you have any questions specific to other people's recommendations, I'm happy to chat about that as well. My new website's being released in the next week or two. In it is links to my physiological testing, analysis, and programming course. And that's 4 modules.
Thanks again for joining us, Daniel. This was awesome. If you want to learn more from Daniel, you can reach out through his website, strategichealthperformance.com. He's got a new course, so it's physiological testing, analysis, and programming. You can also find that through KORR's certification page. We have Daniel's and a number of other providers' certifications that will just, if you really want to take a deep dive into this stuff. And as Daniel mentioned, if you want to learn more about his methods, his approach, the theory behind everything, his would be a great course to check out. We'll leave links below to find those things. And as always, remember, if you want more content like this, remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Ready to take your metabolic testing to the next level? Visit KORR.com to learn more about purchasing our metabolic test equipment.